2, go for it, dude.
Welcome back to Between Sets. I'm your host, Tim Walcott. Here, I'm joined by my other co-host, Tyler Paterson.
Hola.
We're also joined today by Brian Hallam, who
Good morning.
This will be his second appearance on the show. So yeah, we're happy to have Brian. We thought, especially considering the current state of affairs with COVID, and just how that relates to healthcare in general, and maybe some of the things that people are seeing online. Brian could help shed some light on that stuff, as well as his experience thus far, as far as being in sales in the health, as far as the healthcare system and how that relates to your work now. Do you want to tell people what you do now, or maybe your history, what you did do and what you've transitioned into recently?
Yeah. So last time I was on the podcast was talking about a big coat drive we were doing. So I was in mostly the world of Hep C. And what that meant was a lot of screening and outreach programs. I've moved away from that organization and transitioned into medical devices. So I do have a bit of a follow-up for that coat drive. It was a great success. But before I get to that, I work in med device now. So it's a very different kind of sales process. It's all product oriented instead of service oriented. And major things are targeted temperature management and drainage products. So that's awesome on a normal day-to-day. When COVID came, everything kind of got shut down and we moved to exclusively PPE. So we're doing masks, shields, and gowns is the majority of the calls I'm making right now. Mm-hmm. And it's just been complete chaos. Like the general purchasing rules have been thrown out the door.
Yeah.
Most often I'm reaching out to not only hospitals, as is my normal role, but like cities, first responders, like various departments, anybody that might be interested in getting like a lot of positive feedback and a lot of big ordering. And it's pretty crazy right now. Mm-hmm. But I guess I'm grateful to be able to have a little impact on it, be able to support some people. And as much as it is like a really booming time, I guess you could say, at least in my world, I would much rather not have this. And I'd much rather everything be back to normal, because that is a way more comfortable environment for me, but that's fine.
You're involved in the sales through a company that distributes PPE then? And then
So
okay.
I'm an independent agent, and I represent a medical device company actually based in Ontario.
Okay.
So I'm managing Alberta and British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And they're an amazing organization, like a bunch of rock stars, and they're just well connected in med device. So when this happened, they just kind of went out and tried to work with some of their other collaborators to get PPE and support the increasing demand. And this was very early on. Mm-hmm. So by the time we actually had access, it was a huge problem in making a call with I can call up a hospital and I'll be put through to 3 different people that I need to speak with, and we'll have orders within 48 hours. And that's not uncommon. Whereas in my normal day-to-day with like target temperature management and drainage products, like that sales cycle is going to be like anywhere from, at least a couple weeks minimum on like a very fast end to like 6 to 12 months. So things are really crazy. I haven't been in this game that long, mm-hmm. but I've never had the kind of turnaround that we've been experiencing in the past.
So did your company voluntarily make this choice to switch over then? They didn't have there wasn't like some level of government suggestion there or something?
Well, there was a lot of government demand, which kind of drove their decision to reallocate resources. Also, So the first week of COVID, because I'm working in ICUs primarily, I'm not going in there. And they don't want to talk to me about targeted temperature management products as much as they actually are relevant for COVID. There's a lot of competition. We come in, it's a very kind of like slow, gradual development. And it's a capital acquisition. You need a bunch of training. I've got to come in and do a bunch of in-servicing. It's not a very practical thing to do right now. Mm-hmm. And so I just really wasn't able to do much at all. I was trying to just brainstorm ideas. I was talking to my boss a bunch, trying to see what other angles we can take. The second that we got the PPE access, that's 100% of the sales team's focus. So there's 4 or 5 people that are working in Ontario actually, I don't know if that's true at all, but how many people like this shipping out, dealing with the actual logistics of the products and devices. But the 10 of us across the country that work as independent agents or just as sales representatives all of our energy got kind of transitioned into working with PPE.
It's crazy, eh? Like how many of these things have changed just overnight and people had no idea.
It's crazy. And it's also crazy because, like, I'm not an expert in PPE. I'm very transparent about that with everybody I talk to.
Yeah.
But neither are they. So when
what are you talking about? That's why we have you on. You're a PPE expert. I'm Hallam, PPE expert.
Yeah. When they ask me questions, I'll get them answers because I've heard the question 12 times already and I've been able to find out. But I can very quickly tell that they're just like giving orders, buy as many as you can. And I was like, oh, God. So they're asking like their kind of whatever questions they were told to ask.
Right.
But they don't know any more than I do. And it's just this really confusing process where it's not normal. Everything is so strange about what we're experiencing. There's such a rush, so much urgency, so much seriousness. It's and everyone's so grateful. It's there's beauty to it, but the chaos is something I'm a little bit ambivalent towards.
Yeah. I like the way the world comes together in crises like this. But there's also a lot of like crookedness. So, thinking companies just price gouging and that sort of thing, which makes me sad. So I like that everyone's so grateful. You actually, you're seeing firsthand that people are actually really grateful for your service. So that's nice.
The other thing, and we have to, I've never been pushed back at all on the price. So we are actually extremely reasonable, but the prices are more than they would have been 6 months ago. And that's largely because of freight. So when we have to ship in products, we have to fly everything in where usually it would just be on a cargo, like on a ship.
Yeah.
And that cost it's going to double, triple our costs. And then it obviously gets put onto the consumers.
Definitely.
It ends up being super substantial, but like all the boats are being stopped. Whatever happened to the pipeline protesters? I wonder if they're still doing it. But it's even like that was our issue before, is there was delays in getting the ships into the ports because of the protests. I don't know if that's still happening. It might be, but now they aren't coming in at all because of COVID. So everything has to be flown in, and there's costs associated with that. So everything that's being purchased just got a lot more expensive, and there's a lot less money because the taxes and people aren't working.
Nobody's working.
So it's this kind of perfect storm in a really gross way. But anyways,
it's pretty crazy.
That.
Well, actually, on a positive note, actually, go ahead, Brian. But then
I was going to say recap on the co-drive.
I was just going to ask this.
Okay, real quick. Yeah. So there was organizations in Calgary, Kamloops, and Red Deer that took all of the donations, and they were able to hand them out to a bunch of people in need in all those urban centers. They were all super grateful, super grateful to everyone that participated, as am I. We got at least 50 people coats this winter.
That's amazing, man.
That's amazing.
And then I know there's a lot more gloves than that, which was fantastic. So that was awesome. I opened up the box. I was like, oh my.
Hey, man, there'll be another winter. Winter is coming.
No, those are gone. Like they're all.
Oh, were they? Oh, good.
Within days.
Oh, good. Oh, okay.
That's crazy. They get taken up immediately. So everybody was a little warmer this winter, and it feels amazing to have played a little part.
Dude, that's good for you, man. Else. That's amazing what you did. That's cool.
I really appreciate what you guys did in Ontario. It helped me out a ton. I thought it was just the one box, and another one came in the next day. I'm like, yes. So it was fantastic. It felt really
good. that was a great initiative, man. We're really happy to be a part of it. So it's pretty cool.
Definitely. Yeah,
it was great.
For sure.
Cleaned out a lot of closets too, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think people are also happy to get rid of where they're like, I'm not using this. Like,
exactly.
But it's a perfectly good coat. I remember my mom had a couple where she's like, Tim, this is a Calvin Klein. We should definitely give them this.
You're so excited to give them something expensive.
I was like, I don't know. Does it work? That's what matters, I guess. Will this keep someone warm? But yeah, it was awesome. She's like, they got to look good.
It was a great success, and definitely no complaints.
On that note, shifting back to the COVID stuff, it's kind of a general question, but maybe something you could kind of go down the rabbit hole on. Me and Tyler are here in Ontario, so we're observing things maybe from a provincial perspective. You're in Alberta, so maybe some differences there. But as far as, nationally, Canada's response to COVID, what are your thoughts on that as far as what we've done so far as a country? Its response, and then as well as maybe even the all this EI and tax help and emergency response plans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I want to preface everything I'm about to say. I am working from home. I did a few Costco and Cabela's trips. Otherwise, I've remained completely isolated indoors. But that's out of respect.
Cabela's is essential in Alberta.
Oh, yeah. Well, man, I went to Cabela's in Abbotsford, and they were clear out, too. Ammunition was really uncomfortable.
Yeah, that would.
Same situation for the most part here in Alberta. I was going for shotgun shells. Like it was we're just going to shoot some clays. It was my roommate and I, who we've already had a serious exposure, so we've just accepted the risks of that. But anyway, to go back to your question, so I'm really ambivalent towards the whole thing. There's a lot of kind of pieces that don't make much sense to me. And I can explain that, but it's just like the fear of the cure being worse than the problem. The loudest people in the media don't have to experience the ramifications of losing their shirts due to this economic shutdown. And like, I'm one of those fortunate people as well, but I don't know how normal that is. And if you were to poll the population at large, how are you dealing with the consequences? Is a really interesting question that I don't think is being answered adequately enough. Mm-hmm. Health economics, which I'm hoping we can kind of break off into a tangent here. It's definitely so I have just a recap. I did a kin degree, an econ degree, and then I went and did my master's degree in epidemiology and biostats. So economics was where like I came into school being like, I actually give a shit and I'm going to do well here and put my, focus on my studies, as opposed to the first time coming through university. It just seems to be like more of a party. And I think that's a pretty common story. So economics is something I was really dialed in for, and I love it. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Health economics is just, obviously the economics of health. And the biggest question you have to answer is, what is the cost of a life? So if you have a medication that comes in that costs $500,000, but will add 10 years to your life, it might be worthwhile. But if you have a drug that costs $10 million and adds 6 months to your life, you got to question, is that worth investing in as a single payer? And the answer in that context would be no. That's like very egregious, and like, I understand the simplicity there, but what is the price that you're willing to pay? And if we had a specific number, then we'd be able to kind of analyze this whole situation. If we had a lot of other data, which I'll get into as well.
Just have a reference point.
Yeah, we'd be able to know like what makes sense as an intervention and what's worth spending the money on. Or in this circumstance, it's not spending money, but it's not letting people earn money, which is essentially the same thing in a lot of ways. Yeah. So that question will never, I don't think it'll ever be answered. It's just so controversial. And like, that's the thing about American healthcare, is when you have the ability to pay whatever you want to pay. So in Canada, you can't go like, I'm going to go see my family physician, I'm going to get a checkup, and I'm going to pay him an extra $5,000 to do these 8 procedures. You can't do that. Like as long as OHIP in Ontario, or as long as the provincial payer is willing to pay, you are unable to pay to expedite or to get a increased, more comprehensive care or whatever. So it's not an option here. In the States, it is. So if you're dying, you will just mortgage your house. You will sell everything to get the best possible healthcare you can. And there's a lot of healthcare providers that are willing to take your money. And so you end up having a much more expensive healthcare system. The difference is it's largely voluntary. So people are choosing to spend recklessly when it comes to healthcare expenditure. So we don't have that here. But the media being just like so overwhelmingly toxic and inflammatory, I've deliberately avoided it for the most part. So my trick to dealing with this whole thing is searching things like declining cases of COVID and success handling COVID. And that's been
nice. Confirm my bias.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just like, what's the positive bias I can have in this whole situation? And I'm just going to look to explore where that could be found. And I have had a little bit of success that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were saying, I know that that's a controversial kind of topic, and we don't have to go into like our opinions either way. But do you think that, because you raised a good point that, there's a lot of people that don't have to risk losing their shirts during the shutdown.
Yeah.
And they're also quick to bite back anyone who maybe questions, is the shutdown worth it? Right. And unfortunately, just like any other social or political argument, people get lumped into the extremes where it's like, if you question, is the economic shutdown worth it? people automatically think, oh, so you think this is a hoax?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, no. That's not what this is saying. I think all questions should be valid. Every conversation should be allowed to be platformed and talked about, right?
That's the biggest signal right there. It's like when you try to question something and they immediately throw you into that camp and condemn you in some way.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm just like, it doesn't, like I'm getting some. So the other big one worth mentioning is my previous work was always with the most marginalized, with a generally homeless, generally drug addicted individuals. Now we're talking the most immunocompromised people in the population on average. I don't think that's an unfair statement. Mm-hmm. And they're often sleeping in shelters where it's like bunk bed situations where you're getting like 30 people into a room, and very often like picking up cigarettes, maybe not the best hygiene kind of practices. There's a lot of criticisms if you're looking to avoid COVID at all costs, mm-hmm. right? And I'm not seeing people dropping like flies in these communities, and it just doesn't make sense. There's a lot of details that I'm saying, I don't know, I don't really get it. And it's like, well, now there's people in Italy that are dying that are under 20. I don't know. Like you're going to get somebody that throws some data at you that I haven't really assessed or verified or validated at all. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it's not an issue. And I've been doing my little thing with my self-isolation, but it's just, I do question a lot of it. And it just seems, it seems that doing so gets you in a little bit of trouble. And that makes me increasingly uncomfortable. And I hope it passes shortly.
And on that topic too, I think that's a good point, but also the fact that you were saying, people can just throw data at you. Right now is a time where there's so much data, and it's probably, it's probably another good reason to avoid the media, or at least avoid getting swallowed by it all day, which, I'm a victim of as well. And now I have to kind of schedule and strategize when I'm going to look at these things and update myself. But like there's beyond just the clickbaity headlines, which they need the clicks for, so we know how the media machine works. It's like they're also throwing out data to confirm their own bias on whatever they're trying to say. So, you don't need all this different data. Like the human brain can only, has the capacity for so much.
Right.
It's like more numbers is not better. You might disagree in general, because I know you like metrics, but it's like to a degree, it's like, what are you going to do with all of this? Like it doesn't change your behavior other than just what you think. So,
I think better quality data is better. And I think more data of the same quality is better, but they're not necessarily, they're using these tiny little subsections or chunks of data to make these clickbaity stories.
And everybody's doing that. Almost everybody's doing that.
But there's it's not new data. It's just like some other subsection of existing data.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can look at it and spin it however you'd like. It's just like if you're telling me about 3 cases of people being infected under 50, it's like, or under 30. It's like that that doesn't carry weight in my assessment of the severity of this issue.
Sure.
But if you're going to look at okay, so we can get to another huge issue I'm having right now is testing. So I have
that skews everything all of a sudden. Yeah.
I have somebody very close to me that was sick one night, just literally throwing up, and called in the next morning as a responsible citizen and said, I've been having these symptoms. I've got I was violently ill last night. I'm feeling very fluish. I don't know what's going on. And so they asked him a few questions about symptoms, and I don't think he had a fever, and he wasn't coughing. I forget what the other question was, but because he didn't have those symptoms, don't worry, just stay home. You don't need to get tested. It was just so this is somebody I'm not saying he was symptomatic for COVID, but he had concern. He had reason to be concerned, and he wasn't even able to get tested. So the only people being tested are the ones that have the most egregious symptoms. So you're saying the top 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever percent of the most symptomatic COVID cases are being tested. Of those,
and that's just because of the access to testing, right? You only have so much testing available.
Right. I don't know what the real limiting factor there is. Presumably, they can only test so many people at a time, and the labs are all backed up. In which case, that would be the biggest way to address future responses, to increase the capacity for testing. But as long as you don't know the base population you're working with, you have no idea how dangerous this is.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's very possible that 80% of the population at large is COVID positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And has been since January.
Sure. Yeah.
We have
no idea. Or it may be 3 years ago, and it just takes a long time to manifest. Like, we have no clue. So it's that lack of information, but the willingness to make such conclusive assessments based on the information you have brings a lot of skepticism to me.
I think that's a good point.
I have zero conspiracy theories at all whatsoever. I think I do not agree with anything I've read.
Like, it was man-made?
Yeah,
you don't think it was man-made, Brian?
Some of them are pretty funny. Well, that one's like you could think that, I guess. But
that one's not that wild. You know, wilder ones is like 5G.
The celebrity ones?
Yeah, the celebrity ones, or the 5G ones.
What's that? I haven't heard that one.
The idea that 5G cell towers are what's making people sick, and they're using COVID as a scapegoat. That's a good one.
Perfect. But yeah, like, I'm not buying into those at all whatsoever. I think that the fear people are experiencing is based on data that is generally true. It's just incomplete.
Yeah. So with that all being said, Brad, do you think we're doing enough to like combat COVID, or do you think we're not doing enough?
I think I don't have a better intervention beyond shutting down the borders and expanding screening.
Okay.
But I'm just like, the panic that some people are living with, I might say, like, download some meditation app and chill out.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, like, it's not really necessary to freak out. And I think we can get through this and hopefully identify who is at risk, and more importantly, who's not at risk, and be able to slowly bring people back into the workforce. I think that's a very important priority that's being largely ignored until this issue is completely resolved.
So what you're saying is you want people to die, and you like money more than lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Brian Hallam, 2020.
Yeah. But if you're able to identify who's not at risk, who's to say those individuals wouldn't be able to go back to the workforce if they voluntarily chose to? And I think that kind of an openness would be very positive. But we won't know that until we test everybody. And so we got to really expand these testing protocols and do a lot of
the panic is an interesting thing, eh? Like, you know, the 2 weeks ago, somewhere around that time, you know, plus or minus a few days, like the panic that I witnessed here, and, you know, in the town that the Personal Motus Strength Health Club, the studio is located in, like, there was a weird vibe, man, like something I've never experienced until now, and I don't think I'll ever forget. And it was pretty eerie. It was pretty strange. And from just a human behavior standpoint, just seeing how people respond to the unknown, uncertainty, and just all those, the fear of it all was fascinating in the most negative sense of the term. Like, you know, it didn't make me feel good, but also now looking back, I'm like, I mean, I'm sure there's lessons to be learned there, but it was just, the panic was so strange, man. It was so fast, you know, like how that whole TP hoarding thing started.
Yeah.
Like,
people don't understand the issue, and there's people that are willing to step up and provide this extremely, I have a high level of expertise on this subject. Let me tell you what to do.
Right.
And all of those individuals were saying the same thing, which was like isolation, which was stay at home, don't interact with people, and keep your distance. And so that's the measures that were eventually adopted. But it's, I guess, like, to fast forward a lot, I was gonna, when you were talking, we were discussing earlier about how if you question something and there's a big issue with you questioning it, you identified a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
And another along those lines, whenever there's a reference to the flu, people seem to get very up in arms. Like, how dare you make the comparison to the flu and minimize the significance of this virus?
Right. Because of the camp because of the camp that would usually use that argument, which I understand the response because how it's been used mostly in this circumstance. Right. Yeah.
It's again as a dismissive kind of comparison.
Right.
So I just looked up in the States, and the CDC estimates so far this season there have been at least 39 million flu illnesses, 400,000 hospitalizations, and 24,000 deaths from the flu. But that comparison is offensive. And like, I'm not saying the flu is nothing. I'm saying the flu is extremely significant. But it doesn't shut down the world. That's the big difference. And then there also is some underlying data that's a lot more I guess comprehensive than what we currently have for COVID, because the testing is much more vast. Yep. So it's and then there's also, like, the flu affects babies, which immediately prioritizes it in the world of health. which is pretty interesting. But that kind of a comparison is like not allowed right now, but I think it's a very interesting one. And I think there's a ton of people that are very significantly impacted. And then there's also a vaccine for a lot of different flu strains, which there is not for COVID. So that's another way to shut that one down. But it's definitely worth reviewing. You know, it's definitely worth.
Questions should always be asked. The conversation should always be had.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there. And why are those people in any way less important? Like, why are we not willing to shut down parts of the economy for them?
Yeah,
it doesn't.
I mean, let me present. One of the reasons why the shutdown would be necessary, and I don't think any of us is saying it isn't. We're just saying, and maybe having that conversation would be useful. But what do you think about the whole, the notion of shutting everything down, getting everyone to isolate, because we're already late to this, and then we need to protect the healthcare infrastructure from being overwhelmed by the influx of positive cases rather.
I get the fear, and then by the time it actually happens, it's too late. So you have to take these kind of actions early. But I just don't understand. It's a tough question, man, because like you're right. Like if there are a ton of people that got affected by COVID and you didn't have the space, that's a way bigger emergency. But I also what is the intervention we're currently taking in the healthcare system? Like, what are we doing with these patients? Are we impacting their survival rate in a significant way? Those kind of questions are interesting to me. Is it like we just have the peace of mind of knowing they're in a hospital bed intubated, but it's not actually going to increase their life expectancy or their probability of survival, I should say?
Yeah.
I don't know the answers to any of those, and they're all interesting questions that I have no idea where to find the answers for.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the day, at this point, there's an extreme limitation on data, and anytime there's a contagious illness that's being spread through the population at large, trying to minimize the constraints that you perform to control the spread, I think is important. And that wasn't done at all. So it's 100% everything shut down by and large. Shut down every single thing you can, and we'll deal with the consequences of that later.
Right.
But for now, we're going to control. Yeah, we're going to control this issue because we don't actually have any data to make a rational, effective measure on.
Yeah. It's a tough call. I think Canada overall is doing reasonably well. What was I going to say? Oh, the interesting thing going back to the panic too, as far as it relates back to the media machine with this stuff too, is, they've induced a lot of this panic in people, I think, as well, because, they don't stop moving and they know that there's a large amount of fear. And all the hypochondriacs and everyone, plus or minus them, have also been wanting to get testing, and they're themselves also contributing to the overwhelming healthcare system, which is totally not only unneeded, but it's harmful in this circumstance. Like in Guelph here, it was told to me that, right when they opened up their first testing site, they had like 150, something like that, people come out to be tested who thought they should be tested based on their own self-assessment. And 9 of them were only accepted because they had the criteria to be tested positive, and I don't even know who tested positive out of the 9. This was earlier on, so maybe none. But it's just like, man, that's pretty telling. Like, stay home. Like, like everyone, I walked a little bit quick, and I have a shortness of breath, so maybe I should go get tested.
Right.
No, just stay home. You're gonna be fine.
And then you'll listen to infectious disease specialists saying that, like, you don't need to be wearing a mask unless you have COVID. So you reduce the spread, but it's not going to impact your ability to contract the virus.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's varying opinions on that too, but it's like all these people buying these masks, walking around, kind of continuing to perpetuate this intense fear, it's like,
yes, yeah,
it's very discomforting for everyone. Maybe it's necessary. And if it is necessary or helpful in any way, then let's get everyone that goes outside masks and gloves and can try. I just like, I think prioritizing getting back to business is extremely important. And that's kind of what I keep going back to. If you just like, it's just the biggest shotgun approach ever of just like everything in the path needs to go.
Right.
It's like, we don't know exactly what is causing this. Like, we don't know precisely anything. So just shut down everything. Yeah. And I just think that's irresponsible. Yeah. And I've read a couple articles about over 200,000 people not defaulting, but like pushing back their payments on their mortgage and being unable to pay this month. And then it was from 2017, but a CBC article, 47% of respondents said they'd be difficult to meet their financial obligations if their paychecks were delayed by even 1 week. You know, so you're going to stretch this on for 3 months, and like, how much of Toronto is just a bunch of millennials that like to be in the center of the world and are really living paycheck to paycheck and overextending themselves, most likely.
99% of them.
Yeah, and the same thing. The same thing in Vancouver, and I'm sure the same thing to some extent in Calgary, and just every Winnipeg, every urban center, Montreal, every urban center across the country. You know, and it's the same story. What are all these people doing? And then the big thing, like economics, and again, maybe a little insensitive, but there's a lesson to be learned in all this. And like the whole notion of a safety net, never in our lives being like anywhere from 20 to 35 years old, maybe not 35, 30 years old, never in that, if anybody that age, you have not experienced an economic downturn in any significant way. So 2008 was real. That was a big hit to the economy at large. And that was 12 years ago. So I'm 28 years old. I would have been 16. I wasn't working. I wasn't in the markets. I wasn't like a real adult in any significant way.
I have no memory of it. Like, it did not affect me at all personally.
Exactly. Yeah. So this one's very different. But these happen, and not that infrequently, where these massive economic downturns, and then people that do have those safety nets are able to continue on and get through them with this independent, because they took responsibility for their finances and responsibility for their future. The people that don't and overextend in every single way, they're going to get bailed out by Trudeau, and it's guaranteed to happen. And there's going to be these massive payment plans that go out to allow everybody
which just incentivizes that behavior further, right?
That's like a big problem.
Irresponsibility. Yeah.
So it's like, and the same thing happened in the collapse in 2008 in like bailing out all those banks. That corporate welfare notion is something that's a very uncomfortable precedent to set, because then it's basically saying you don't have to be responsible not only as an individual.
You can't fail. Yeah,
not an individual, but like as a large enough corporation. It's just, do whatever you want. We'll take care of you if things go south. And I think that's the big lesson that I hope a lot of people take away from this, is that like you should have a little safety net there. You shouldn't overextend. You shouldn't be living exclusively on cash flow. It's those kind of realizations I hope people catch on to. But at the end of the day, I think being super responsible today makes you a bit of a schmuck. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter. You're going to get bailed out. There's going to be no consequences for your behavior. A lot of
times. Totally.
And that definitely brings some frustration to me. So.
Yeah. But, go ahead, Ty.
I was just going to say, I think with all that being said, I wanted to give a life lesson to everybody right now, kind of circling back to the kind of start of the question there, is that the media, we know how the media works. Obviously, it's kind of fear mongering. People need to go, I need to consult an actual expert in some way. Like if you're watching the news and it's an actual expert of some kind. So like, you know, if you are some sort of doctor, you're actually on the front lines and they're on the screen being like, you guys don't understand what this is. Please stay home. We have no idea. It's people way smarter than you are saying like, please don't do that. Right. So all these people just learning from their friends and family. It's like, it's kind of irresponsible. Try to find the expert in whatever you're trying to do. Like you wouldn't hire Tim to be your plumber. You'd hire him to be your personal trainer, and you wouldn't hire a plumber to be your personal trainer.
And you should.
And you should hire Tim. Not right now, because we're not working.
Yeah, come on. That's an insensitive self-promotion. Come on, how dare you?
But then
these are trying times.
These are trying times. But then to the same to the same effect when talking about the people that are going to be bailed out. I'm part of a bunch of Facebook groups of massage therapists. And obviously we're all independent contractors. Most of us are self-employed, and that $2,000 that the CERB is going to give us is huge. Like, they're trying to actually feed their kids. Like, they're trying to be responsible people. So, you know, there is people that kind of leech off the system, which is unfortunate, and it sucks a lot. So I think hopefully we're going to be better prepared for, I mean, hopefully a pandemic doesn't ever come again, but I think next time we'll be more prepared to go. I don't know if we handled that as well as we could have. We kind of got caught with our pants down right now.
Yeah.
So hopefully we kind of learn from it.
Not that this is going to make me sound any more sensitive, but the real takeaway that I'm trying to like kind of highlight is the fact that if you don't have, you know, a 6-month safety net of just like in the bank account, that's a problem. And overextending yourself to get a slightly bigger house, because we all know, like, in our lives, buy the biggest house you can with as little as you can down and wait 40 years and you just made $180,000 of equity.
Because what people look at affordable, if I can afford it, that just means, can I borrow money for it? Can I afford the loan for it?
Can I get access to the financing to make this my reality?
That's it. And it's like, I mean, ultimately we're arguing against an overly consumerist, materialistic kind of idea here, you know, so which I think most people would agree with us on.
Yeah. It's largely real estate for me. It's just something that I find people will pour every single cent they have. And it's even me, like, I've saved up a nice little safety net, and most people in my circumstance just go buy a house.
Right.
So then I won't have any money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be, and like, except for this situation you find yourself in, you won't even spend time there. You would sleep there every now and then. You're just paying for a bed and a kitchen and a storage. You know what I mean? Like, people forget what they use the house for. Like, how many people actually spend time in their home? Yeah. Like, you have to work all the time to keep this house that you're not even ever in.
Yeah, but you should get a house. Like, I think like that's an awesome thing to do, but it's like when you can afford it.
Sure.
And that's the big kind of limiting factor that I think has not been considered for a long time. And I'm hopeful that this kind of chaos, that nobody gets hurt, everybody is able to make it through, but we're able to take this lesson and apply it as a more fiscally conservative country moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
I think this is the adult equivalent to touching the stove and being like, oh, I'm never doing that again. Like, we're actually going to learn.
100%.
We needed to learn the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go, oh, if this ever happens again, I'm going to die without the government help, which, you know, I'm grateful that the government is there to do these things. But like you said, Brian, in the same way, I'm fortunate enough to still live at home. So I have enough money to last me for pretty good amount of time, basically. So I think it's important for people to learn that. It's a very simple idea, but try as best as you can to live within your means, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Brian, we're gonna shift gears here and keep on moving down these questions.
Do it.
I did want to ask you, you know, and this may be kind of a quick one-off, but and maybe a quick little no, I don't know. But is there a way that you think we could have been ready for something like this global pandemic, as you know, as a global population, or even just as us in Canada?
As a global population, no. As in Canada, and I say no because there's just so many differences between countries.
Yeah.
That kind of forcing your rules and regulations on any country is never happening. As an Albertan, I will give you my biased Alberta answer. And domestic supply being like, for example, oil and gas is always our conversation here. Why is it that we go to OPEC for our petroleum and they're going to ship it over here when we have domestic oil supply and we're supporting the existence of this criminal cartel in the Middle East, in Russia? These kind of issues, I think, are really interesting and relevant. And I think utilizing the resources that we have here as Canadians, we are a resource economy, and being able to provide our own resources would make a lot of sense to me. I don't think that'll ever happen. I think globalization in general is a really great thing. I think the more the merrier. Almost any other time, I would be very comfortable saying that. Right now, it's very just nationalistic. Everything should stay here. Everything should be produced here. Everything should be done here. That'll change, and I think that's for the better. I think globalization is a positive force at large. The ability to be able to manufacture domestically is important. So I think I've read a lot about the generic medications that are on crash carts at hospitals, for example. They're all produced in China and India. It would be nice that we had some small fraction of manufacturing done domestically such that we could increase scale in a crisis. And that's something that I don't think we have the ability to do. That's a little discomforting. But the biggest thing, and it's kind of like, without getting too political, we're preventing our own provinces from flourishing. And now you can make a lot of different claims, whether that be environmental is the big one here in Alberta, or I guess with BC and Quebec, they've got a big environmental concern on Alberta. But being able to work together into kind of flourish as a country would make a lot more sense than condemning and isolating parts of the country that you don't agree with and importing stuff from other countries that are way more crooked than Alberta could ever dream of being. I think we have a great regulatory environment here, and I think it's enforced. You can't get even 10 feet from a pipeline without having 12 licenses and 36 different credentials. In Canada, I don't know if that's the same overseas, and no one's fact checking that. So it's if you can't afford to manufacture domestically because you can't afford to compete in the global environment, okay, but the regulations that make it so expensive to produce here are not being enforced where the competition's present. So I think all these considerations are very interesting. In the short term, what can we do to be ready for, or to have been ready for something like this? No. I don't think anything could have done. I think people acted very quickly and very significantly. I have a bit of a criticism that may have overshot. I would have collected a lot more data, but maybe they couldn't. That's the other thing, is I'm very sympathetic to the realities that other people are facing. We're all working with limited data, and they have to make decisions as people that are responsible for the well-being and healthcare of Canadians. Mm-hmm. So you're going to take your action, whatever you think is appropriate based on limited data you have. And in this case, it's the risks of not taking action where everyone dies. That's the worst case scenario. I don't think that's a reasonable concern, but that's my opinion based on even less data. So maybe they got more than me, and they're just making an educated decision with what they've got. And I'm open to that being the reality because I don't know that much.
Right.
So I don't know, bit of a non-answer, but
no, that's good. I mean, it's
kind of support local.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, even in these smaller kind of urban centers and smaller town centers, if the whole support local thing is a little bit more encouraged. It always has been, and depending on who kind of expresses that notion, sometimes it's a little bit cringe. But
I'll say support national then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I do believe in that sentiment. I do believe in what it means, support local. And even more so now, it's this is going to be pretty hard on a lot of small businesses. And it's probably, I've already done a few things personally for what I can in Erin, where the studio is, for some of the local businesses there that I would normally support anyway.
Right. And
I think when we come out of this, that is going to be, at least for me, it's going to be even more so on my mind, especially considering that I've definitely been affected negatively by this severely, but not as bad as others. So right. I think I definitely have the opportunity to give a little bit where I can. So, but when this blows over, I'm definitely going to be thinking way more of that. I know Amazon is super convenient, but it's and Walmart is super convenient for a lot of my stuff, but I am probably, just because of the weight of this, it's really shifted my perspective on all right, do I have a second option here that's maybe within my local economy?
I dig that for sure. I completely agree. I've been thinking a lot of the same things too.
Yeah.
And just trying to get, if you do pay a premium for a better product, I have no issue with that.
Right.
And just trying to find access to those goods. But it's interesting to consider how much North America, even if you just want to consider, again, sorry if I'm a little bit too much here, but Canada and America, the amount of potential we have as kind of a bordering nations is pretty incredible. And so being able to partner with a country like America and to be able to have this, even if that's not truly domestic, but having a supply that's contained between those two countries would be, and even throw in Mexico, let's go for all of North America. You know, we'd be a pretty incredible. We'd be able to, as like a group, a small group, be able to control these. We wouldn't have to rely on Asia, on Europe in any way at all whatsoever. And so some sort of a shutdown would actually be manageable. God forbid this ever happens again. Right. That's an interesting consideration that I'd be very supportive of.
Sure.
I think it's just like there's so many people doing such amazing work here that are being kind of, I experienced it a lot. It's something I'm super sensitive to when I went from Vancouver to Calgary. And like the pretension of the Lower Mainland was something that I was very frustrated by when you think about all like the rednecks and the woods people that live anywhere except the Lower Mainland. Even when you talk about interior British Columbia, there's a lot of like condemnation. And then even worse when you talk about Alberta, like, oh, Alberta, everyone cringes. But I come here and it's like these amazing communities of just like such hardworking, incredible people. And I've only had great experiences. And this is like a low time. This is not like a great time for Alberta, especially now with all these dropping oil prices with OPEC. So it's my experience here has been a ton of hardworking people just looking to get after it and provide for themselves and their loved ones and their families. And I think that should be encouraged. And that's a lot more of the Canadian backbone than people realize.
What are, you know, kind of goes back to what we were saying a little bit earlier, I guess, but like, what is your opinion on this stuff as far as, you know, the economic shutdown, as well as the anxiety around the actual pandemic spreading? What are your opinions, if any, on its effects on the population's mental health?
Yeah, that's the thing that you can't quantify. Going like to that, sorry, what was the, yeah, when you're I don't know if I mentioned this quote earlier, but when you're studying smoking, that's easy. Just count the number of cigarettes and duration and packs per day. With something like radon, how do you measure exposure, particularly biologically relevant exposure that's taken place in the past? So that quote's perfect for talking about COVID, but it's also perfect for talking about mental health. So we can't measure it. So the consequences, again, are going to be non-negligible, I think we can all say at the very least. And so how is that going to play out? How long is that going to take to recover? Is that worth dwelling on at all or considering right now when we're doing these massive shutdowns? Because there are consequences that are being ignored. So it's I believe it is important to consider. I believe the mental health consequences are going to be rather severe. I believe that if you get, some companies are going to be able to get back to normal and continue on, but there's a lot of organizations that just, they'll be able to open the doors again, but when it's like they're starting a new business. So say you have like anywhere from a 1 to 3 year period where you expect before you're making profits, but now you're making profits. Everything's all good. You're like, okay, we've got a sustainable business now, and we have this shutdown. It's basically like you're starting that business all over again, because the economy at large is not spending as aggressively as they were. Everybody's pocketbooks are a little thinner than they'd like them to be.
You're using all the strategies you did to pull in leads and clients and customers like you did at the start anyway.
Restart. No, and then there's a big thing in real estate is people will refinance. So if I buy a house and then I refinance that house to buy another house, and I refinance that house to buy another house, and as long as I keep putting renters in those houses, I'm able to get a bigger mortgage with less money down, essentially, because I'm showing an income on the properties that I already have. Well, if I have 10 of those properties and 8 of them stop paying rent, what happens? You know, I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of money that's not being paid, and people are going to come calling for it, unless there's so many people that can't pay that banks are just like, okay, we're just going to put a pause on everybody's paying mortgages. And that's kind of what's happening. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it's an interesting observation. People just in general that have never experienced it, I think I'm hoping this all passes in 4 to 6 weeks. We're able to look back and just be like, that was crazy. And like, that's all the conversation we have about it. But I also think there's a lot of lessons that people are able to take away from it that are super positive. And the experience itself has been pretty positive in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I talk to my parents on the phone pretty much every day. You know, I've been having a lot of really great conversations on the phone, or on Skype or on whatever, on Zoom, and everything like that. That piece has been really cool. The ability to step back and reconnect. And then thinking about expanding platforms that are not face-to-face is increasingly scalable. So that's really interesting. But it's just like, that's a small piece of the business that's an opportunity for you to consider and grow at this time. You know, and it's probably not going to be a great time to grow it specifically right now because everybody's doing it largely. and there's so much competition in the virtual space all of a sudden, and there's kind of constricted expenditure, people willingness to spend has been reduced. But it's good to have, and once you create it, it'll eventually be able to be molded and shaped into something that is more viable. And like, this is just giving you the freedom to step back and do so. So like, there are positives to take away from the experience in general, I guess. And it's not such a bad thing for most people that aren't dying. But otherwise, I guess that.
On that note, do you think a lot of companies, corporations, even small businesses that do employ any non-zero amount of people, do you think that they're going to start to see, because of this, they're going to be like, oh wow, we can actually get similar or the same amount of production done without people even coming into work? Or do you know what I mean? Like,
I
some
hope
of these
so. Well, there's always something super conservative dude where people say like, working less hours makes you more productive. I'm like, you're full of shit. That's almost always been my set. It's like something that's very frustrating. Like, thinking the epitome of progress is when you have a 23-hour work week and have 4 days off. Like, I'm not anywhere near there, but I do think there's something to said with like the creativity and flexibility of autonomy in the workplace. And this natural experiment has provided an opportunity for hundreds of thousands of people to work from home, and they may very well be equally as productive. So they can have the flexibility in their life to do so. Now, my fear is that the second businesses reopen their doors, they expect everyone to be there because that's the way it is. And they don't really take this as an opportunity to make their workforce a little more dynamic. But I hope I'm wrong. And I hope that people are able to get a little more flexibility from this. Like, you've done an amazing job. Thank you so much for the work you did at home during this very stressful period. Do you want to keep working at home a little bit? And asking that question to the employees. And I think that's a super reasonable thing to do. I'm not super optimistic that'll happen, but it's a natural experiment in the world of economics.
Totally.
You can't ever run an experiment like this. It's 100% unethical in every way. But we have the experiment taking place, so how can we observe it and take the most positive inferences from it as possible?
I just wish COVID was more ethical, you know?
Yeah, right? Just like, some people, you have a bunch of people that you keep in a cell and give them COVID, and then a bunch of people that you don't. If you had like maybe a cure and
can the UN put
rights commissions?
Yeah, can the UN put like human rights violation sanctions on COVID or something? Like, this is totally illegal.
Everything about it seems unethical. I agree.
Oh, jeez. I wanted to talk like a little bit more, I guess, on the epidemiology and like maybe its limits, just as far as like touch more on that stuff, because I know that you have a master's degree in epi, and everybody's it's kind of going around on social media that everybody's a couch epidemiologist now.
It seems like it. So when I went to grad school, one of the classes, I don't remember the specific name of the course, but one of the things the prof did was she got this paper that was criticizing epidemiology, and she went through the criticisms and kind of said how they were largely invalid. That paper was written by a gentleman named Gary Tobes, who I believe you have a little bit of an issue with in the nutrition sciences, but he wrote a paper called Epidemiology Faces Its Limits, and it was published in Science, and I read through it, and I just kept nodding. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the criticisms also made some sense, but I think that the criticisms of his paper, but his assessment of epidemiology and where we're at was extremely effective. And a large takeaway was that when you make this epidemiological inference and the media gets a hold of it, they're able to make a seemingly conclusive claim on very shady data. Now, I'm not saying the data shouldn't be analyzed, because
Tobes was saying that. I would agree with that. Yeah.
I think
most people would. Yeah.
I think you'd really dig this article in particular. But so that's the smoking quote I gave earlier. That was a big one. Smoking is like very easy to study because its magnitude of effect is so huge. There's going to be, if you're talking about like odds ratios, it's like 100-fold increased risk factor in a lot of like something so substantial that you can't ignore. But when you're talking about like a 1.5 times increased risk of whatever, that's a little more like, let's assess this a little more closely. when they're absolutely giant, you can make a not causal claim still, but you can start getting towards that general direction and maybe get some motivation to do further study. Right. But so smoking's an easy one, but then the example that I just mentioned about radon, it's like, how do you actually measure exposure? Or when you're talking about COVID, how do you actually measure exposure? And that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And all you can do is you can go to COVID positive patients. It's like, hey, what'd you get up to the past couple of weeks? What'd you get up to the past month? And give me like step-by-step everything you did on the 15-minute interval for the past 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, even if you asked a more reasonable question, you're still going to get a very flawed answer. And that's the issue everyone has with recall bias and some sort of questionnaire-based studies. Yeah. And then nutrition, we've all kind of had our criticisms of the literature in nutrition, where it's like, record a diet log, or what'd you eat last week? Yeah. What'd you eat yesterday? Even
that's just as tricky, if not more. Nutritional science is tough, you know?
Yeah. The question that's most significant, what's the fundamental quality of the data? And to what extent is there biases that cannot be controlled by statistical analysis? So that's a quote from the article as well. And the bias here, it's if you asked how many people have COVID. So you don't know. You don't have any idea. So anytime you use a proportional statistic, it's guaranteed to have a giant flaw because you don't know what the base population is. It's like, of the COVID positive patients that went to the hospital, this percentage recovered and this percentage died. Mm-hmm. That's fine. But to be panicked by that statistic is unwarranted.
And that goes into the relative risk and the absolute risk, right? Mm-hmm. And the relative numbers and the absolute numbers is kind of important to understand, I think, from that perspective.
Well, it's like, even so, relative risk, you're talking about Canada having a higher percentage of COVID deaths, for example, than America. This isn't the truth, but say Canada had a higher percentage than the States, and the media would say Canada has a much higher risk. And then if you talk about absolute numbers and the total number of people that have died is just way bigger in the States because there's way more people, then you're talking absolute terms. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about like any percent you derive, whether absolute or relative, or sorry, I guess absolute wouldn't be a percent, but any percent you derive with a flawed denominator. So like, what's the base population? Yeah. So you have no clue. Mm-hmm. And like, I just like, if it is that infectious, if like I've read articles suggesting that 40 to 70% of people will be infected. If that's the reality, then you can't avoid it, realistically, unless you are, completely locking your doors, and maybe you have food delivered and you let it sit outside for a matter of 6 days to make sure that the virus is not going to be kind of present on the surface of it, or you bring it in, you spray it down with alcohol. I don't even know if that would work, but if you got to have really extreme measures, and I think those, like, that severity may be appropriate if you are at a high risk. Now, what that means is a question worth answering. I don't have that answer, but I'd like to be able to collect enough data to be able to make an inference that would be an intervention that's rational and effective. Right. So biggest questions: who's actually vulnerable? Who's not vulnerable? Who are our most sensitive populations? What are the mechanisms of contraction? What's going to cause it? Is it literally being in proximity? Is that it? Is it surface? Is it everything? Is it literally just like you have to shut down the world? That's the only intervention possible. Is that the truth? If it is, then it is. There's nothing you can do about it. And I think it's totally appropriate. But trying to find that strong association between the disease and the risk factor. So the disease is COVID, but who has it? I need everybody that has it. It's not just the people that have it in a symptomatic way. Who has it? And then the risk factor, it's like being able to really identify, is that being immunocompromised? Is that being near people? What is that specific risk factor that we're going to try to hone in on and make sure people are very well aware of what it is? Because right now, when you just like, everything's a risk factor, suddenly nothing's a risk factor to a lot of people. And I think that's going to take away from the effectiveness of the approach of just don't do anything.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have the answer to this question at all, or if you've given any thought into it. And if you haven't, obviously just say that. But I essentially know nothing about this. Can viruses mutate, and is that a problem now that, like, if enough people get the corona and we don't do anything to try to fight it, it'll mutate and people can get it over and over again? Do you have any thought?
Yeah. So it's the Hep C experience is actually really relevant here. So there's a a bunch of different genotypes of hepatitis C. And which means like there was a lot of medications when they first came out with the direct acting antivirals, there was some medications that only affect genotypes 1 and 3, and then some for only 2 and 4, and some for only 5 and 1. And so there's a bunch of these different medications that work for different genotypes. We had all the genotypes covered, so everybody would have treatment, but you can get reinfected with a different genotype, or you could have numerous genotypes. There's a lot of different scenarios that were being dealt with case by case. In this circumstance, there can be 1 million different strains of COVID, but we don't have a solution for any.
Right.
So it's a less relevant conversation right now. When it's like and the big problem you have is when you take an antiretroviral, or you take an antibiotic for COVID, and the antibiotic doesn't work, then you're going to have this virus that's able to mutate to overcome the antibiotics, essentially. So your biggest fear is a resistance to antibiotics or a resistance to treatment. And that's like, so with the Hep C medications, it's a virus, but when you take your medication, you can clear the virus. But if you take it, say you're supposed to take it every day for 28 days, it's actually every day for 12 weeks, but whatever, say 28 days, because we get a bottle at a time. And you take the first day, and you take the 9th day, and you take the 21st day. And so you're getting these little exposures to what you need. You're getting a little exposure to the treatment, but not enough to actually defeat the virus. The virus can then mutate to overcome the treatment. And so then 3 months later, you're like, no, I'm going to take it seriously this time, I promise. And you take it every single day, but suddenly the virus is no longer responsive to that medication.
Right.
So that's a real concern. But again, it's like we don't have any treatments.
Yeah.
You know, there's no cure. There is no specific treatment for COVID. I don't know if they go general antibiotics and that works, or the individuals would have been just like, let it pass. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of questioning that I have.
You kind of getting to the end of this, I do have a positive question for you. You said you said before that you'd been practicing some positive confirmation bias by Googling all the good news stories. Do you have any that you could share that you've come across where you're like, oh, that's good.
So the one thing you look at with an epidemic is the rate of doubling.
Right.
And that's how you're going to create this really nice exponential curve. And so flattening the curve is flattening the exponential growth rate.
You're such a data guy. You just said a really nice exponential curve. Just the way you said that. It's like, nobody says that.
He's like explaining a nice car.
Yeah, it's a really nice exponential curve.
So if you're reducing or like shortening the doubling rate, you are reducing the spread of the virus. And that's happening. That's happening. I'm pretty sure it's happening globally. It's definitely happening in Alberta. I got very biased considerations. But here, that's a really great thing. The number of cases are going down, so of new admissions for COVID, which is another great thing. And it could be the result of an amazing policy to shut down everything. I'm super open to that.
What are your predictions moving forward, if you had to give some?
All right, so I have no credibility here, but I would have to say I think business as usual mid-May.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Business as usual.
Yeah. So like 6 weeks away.
Yeah.
We're able to resume and be able to identify what specific interventions should be taken moving forward, but a lot of people are able to return to work. I think this will all blow over in like 3 to 4 months, and it will be forgotten about in a year, and nothing else will change. The things that my hopes with regards to like domestic supply and domestic manufacturing, I don't think that'll change, just because there's so much cost associated with it. Yeah. And the second that this isn't an issue, it won't be treated as a potential future issue.
Right. It'll just go back to the way it was economically.
And that was shown with the SARS, I guess, epidemic that happened however many years ago. It was controlled, it was isolated, it was squashed, but the virus exists. So it's no longer circulating in the population, but it exists. You can have samples of the virus to analyze and provide cures and treatments for. That wasn't done. The second that SARS was controlled, we move on, don't worry about it, deal with other shit. So that's the reality of the world that we live in. I think it might make a lot of sense to, even though it's no longer here, continue to address and create solutions for potential related problems in the future, and just be able to study those molecules to be able to address them more effectively. That would make sense. But otherwise, yeah.
You know, man, like I too have been trying to focus more on like the silver linings of these things, not just for me personally, but us as a society. And like, there is some pretty cool stories out there of like local entrepreneurs and different business owners that are whether it's, you know, I think everybody's pretty aware now of all these different local small town distilleries that would otherwise be making edible alcohol, and now they're making hand sanitizer in these massive vats. And like stuff like that's pretty cool. And then I know that there's a couple a young couple who are entrepreneurs themselves here in Guelph, and pretty rapidly they developed this pretty simple idea, and just to help incentivize people to stay home, and twofold to support local business, was they were going around filling up this box called the Guelph box, I think they call it, from local businesses in Guelph, filling it up with different items and then delivering it to people's houses. Cool. It was like, just like I love it. I love stuff like that. Like that's really cool, you know? So, and I think there's a lot of that stuff going on. They're always like the small news stories. They don't get the front line, but like stuff like that's always good to hear, I think
that you could, but until you have more conclusive data, I think those should be the only news stories.
Right. Yeah. That's
an interesting point. I agree. There is a lot of them. So if you don't have something new to say, then just like, we don't have to say anything. There's so many amazing things happening right now. Yeah. And we can focus all of our attention and energy on that.
Yeah.
That would make a lot more sense, and I'd be super supportive of that.
Yeah.
I also the Media Machine works how it does, and I don't suspect that will be adopted, but hopefully they give us a listen and change.
In summation, Brian Hallam, do you have any thoughts or anything you? I know Tyler actually has a question that he usually poses to the guests at the end. I guess mine kind of leads up to that, but
no, you can just pose it, Tim, for me.
Yeah, just what is something that you would want everyone to know? Maybe considering the topic at hand and the current climate as well with that.
I think like the analogy that I often use is like, it's like you're a shot in a slingshot. And the world's kind of just pulling you back. And you want to build as much tension into that elastic as you can. And that would take the shape of like any sort of personal development that you have the opportunity to pursue in this moment. So, I mean, just like literally reading, if you want to just, there's so many online resources that you can use to train different skills that would be applicable in whatever you want to pursue. And I know like for me, that's like often data science. And I look at a lot of like R programming. That's interesting to me. I'm doing a bunch of courses on that right now. There's also just generally reading, personal development in that sense. And there's also like the connection piece. It's just because you're at home doesn't mean you can't have a connection to other people. And that doesn't have to be phone calls. That doesn't have to be Skype dates. That can be writing a letter. Like you can just sit at home and write letters for 4 hours. And I guarantee you it's going to make everyone that receives them feel like $1 million. And those are the kind of things that we can take the time now to do. And then if you are in a situation where things got really tight and you're a little overextended, you can have the peace of mind of knowing that things will correct in a period of time. And you're not the only one at all. So there's going to be some large scale interventions that are here to address this, and take the learning experience for what it is, but don't dwell on it. Like the past is the past, nothing you can do about that now. And we're going to move forward and move on. And so use this as a period of time to develop as much as you can and come out of it with that as much tension in that slingshot as possible. It's just get launched to a place of prosperity.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic analogy, bro. I was like, where's he going with this? But that you ended that so beautifully.
Yeah. Every time I've been in a dark period of my life, I just keep like reminding myself, I'm just getting pulled back. But you know it's coming. There's going to be a point in time in the future where you just get let go and launched into this excess and abundance. And that's the kind of attitude that's going to allow you to get through anything. So,
yeah,
love it.
That's what we got to do.
Mindset. That's the Alberta mindset right there. Access and abundance, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Brian, anything else to add, man?
What's that?
Anything else to add?
That's all I got, man. I think there's tons of good books out there. I'd recommend getting a Kindle so you don't have to go to the bookstore.
It's a great place.
Download that on your phone. I guess it's probably not supporting local, but you can return them after and buy them from your local bookstore if you're so inclined.
Definitely.
But yeah, there's just stay positive out there. Stay at home. Give your family and friends a shout. Tell them you love them, and enjoy this as much as you can.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If you're looking for personal protective equipment, you're going to call Brian.
Probably not. Probably don't do that. There's so much chaos. I don't actually see anything. Usually I'll get samples sent to me and I'll be able to tinker and play and be able to really understand every single thing that I'm promoting and selling. With the PPE, it's like, I know these are the specs. If these are what you're looking for, we can provide them. And then I just pass it on to customer service that gets shipped to them. I never see a damn thing. So
nice. Yeah. Obviously, okay. Imagine people start like messaging you, Brian, I was listening to the Between Tests podcast.
Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. I think we touched on a lot of really important topics. Brian, I like your mindset and all that. It was beautiful. And yeah, I'm satisfied for sure. How about you, Tim?
I'm good. He has fulfilled me. Sweet. Thanks for coming on the show, man. That was I think we got to the bottom of it, and we know all the answers now to COVID. And we know exactly how to move forward.
Yeah. I'm going to go outside right now because I feel amazing.
Yeah. The big takeaway is that nobody has the answer, so don't freak out so much, and let's just take this for what it is and enjoy it as much as humanly possible.
Well, let's end on that note. All right, fellas. Thanks for coming on,
the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you guys
later. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yep.